Catch. On our agenda.
All both. Did we? We had the meeting though. I read the minutes. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm like, did they cancel it? Like,
Yeah, the recording wasn't online, which was unfortunate. But
it
Yeah.
broke apparently, as I heard. Or
Oh.
was it from that day?
Yeah,
I'll jump into it. All right. The Wednesday, March 19th meeting of the City of Ypsilanti Planning Commission is in session. Can we get a roll call for attendance?
Commissioner Dunwoody,
Present.
Commissioner Simmons, Commissioner Davis Jr.,
present.
Commissioner Hollyfield,
present.
Commissioner Smith,
Present.
Commissioner Shear,
Present.
Commissioner Jones Chance, Commissioner Marin,
Present.
Commissioner Woodring.
Present.
Forum.
Very good. Thank you. We have agenda approval
You
for,
want to excuse the absences or no?
I think our rule for excusing absences is let us know if you're going to be absent. And as far as I'm aware, nobody was let know that there would be an absence. So
All right.
we'll move right along.
Okay, sounds good.
Agenda approval for this evening's agenda that is included in the packet. Any notes on the agenda before we move to approve? Approve tonight's agenda.
Support.
Motion by Mike, support by Phil. All in favor, say aye.
I
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have approval of the minutes from our February 19th meeting. Those are included in the packet for review. I am going to start with two quick comments for staff. I think there is a redundancy in the headings that is on page 5 of our packet. The non-motorized committee appointment chairperson header is used for the non-motorized appointment and then also used for the dark sky bit and then also used for tenting.
Thank you. We will go ahead and revise that.
Great. I didn't have any other comments on the minutes. Anything from anybody else?
My only comment moved to uh
The support by Michelle. All in favor, say aye.
I
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item 5 on the agenda, the public comment. This is set aside for items on which there is not a public hearing this evening. We will not have any public hearings, so this is the first of only 2 opportunities to speak to the Planning Commission. With that said, a motion would be in order to open the public comment.
so moved.
Support.
Support by, motion by Michelle, support by Phil. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Anybody on Zoom or in the room that would care to comment? Do we have any attendees online? Okay, seeing none, a motion would be in order to close the public comment.
Second.
Motion by Mike, support by Greg. All in favor, say aye.
I
Opposed? Motion carries. Committee reports. We'll start with the non-motorized advisory committee. Mike, anything for us this evening?
Well, this is a easy one. The senior center had some construction and we were not able to get a site soon enough to well, we actually weren't able to get a site, so we had to postpone the meeting last week, and we were on schedule to have the March meeting tomorrow, but now the senior center is closed for indeterminate time due to flooding.
Yeah.
So we're gonna cancel the March meeting, and we'll reconvene in April and hopefully have the library back open, or if not, we'll find a suitable public location to hold it at and make sure we can have a physical meeting location. So
All right, our fingers are crossed.
yeah.
If there's nothing else for non-motorized advisory committee, we'll move on to presentations. Nothing on the agenda for this evening. So right along to old business. I'll turn it to Josh for dark sky compliant ordinance discussion.
I am going to share my screen. So, a lot of these slides are similar to what was on the agenda last month. We went over the importance of dark sky compliant ordinances, and there are links to the harmful effects that light pollution has on the following. They're listed in the bullet points. Went over the 5 principles of responsible outdoor lighting per Dark Sky International. We looked at the city's current ordinance and discussed how it fails to meet all 5 principles. We went over how to apply these principles. And then, per the request of the Planning Commission, I went through and showed 3 different ordinances. Discuss, having that language. I don't feel it's necessary unless you guys would like me to completely go through what these ordinances say, and I can go to where I compared what what's in common with amongst these ordinances and how they compare to dark sky compliant like principles. So if anybody wants me to go over like the specific language of that of those ordinances, I can, but they are all listed in the presentation. Ann Arbor notably has the longest of the ordinances. Um, and then we have Lansing that I provided as an example, and then Holland Charter Township. When comparing these 3 ordinances, it's found that they require fully shielded lighting and lighting that is directed downward. They have limits on light trespass. They have illumination limits. They prohibit flashing, blinking, or moving lights. And they also regulate under canopy lighting. Each of these ordinances are not entirely dark sky compliant. However, they are close. Holland Charter Township probably has one of the better dark sky compliant ordinances. And then there were also some other resources that includes the importance of like dark sky outdoor lighting, the National Park Service's Night Skies article, decoding dark sky ordinances, and then also dark sky approved products. So those are just like lighting fixtures that are recognized as dark sky compliant. When Is there anything in particular that the Planning Commission has questions about these ordinances or about, what they would like to see the city potentially implement based on the language within these ordinances?
So a few of us were absent for the February meeting where I know this was discussed, so I'm going to like welcome a lot of input from other commissioners who have like been a part of the conversation here so far. I do want to start just from the minutes. It seems like there is like some easy money from a lot of the common items in the sample ordinances that are provided. I get the impression from some of the February discussion that like having fully shielded, having illumination limits, kind of prohibiting the flashing or blinking, some of those things feel like they are maybe universally supported by folks on the commission, and that there is consistent with what other communities are doing. And generally, I think that like, kind of taking the easy money there and not trying to reinvent the wheel with the lighting ordinance is going to get us really far here. With that kind of table setting, I'd welcome input from those of you that discuss this and in more depth in February.
Well, I'll start. No, I think this is a really great presentation. So yeah, a lot of gratitude to the staff on this one, Josh. So thank you. I think the only, I honestly felt like reading through this, it, we could take Ann Arbor's and just amend it and sub out Ann Arbor for Ypsilanti and put it through. I did note that like a couple, you made the notes that some of the what they don't comply with each principle, and I thought the principles that they're not, which tends to be the adaptive lighting, and then the 5th one, which is escaping me at the moment, seemed reasonable and maybe a little bit more difficult, I think, to come up with a knock on, a bang on sensible ordinance, and those 5th, 4th, and 5th principles for a citywide ordinance can be a little bit tricky. So it made sense to me as to why they didn't address it or how they tried to. So I thought seemed like a few good cities. I think my only comment was I particularly liked how the city of Lansing's ordinance on one of the referred to ordinances, how their nonconformity ordinance was, and it's a little bit similar to the city of Ann Arbor's, which basically what I liked is that it put not a lot, it seemed to have a good amount of administrative review for non-compliance and potential site plan coming to a planning commission. It didn't have an explicit list of these are all the things staff can do. These are all the things that need to come to planning commission. So I thought that made a lot of sense to look at from the nonconformity side to make sure we're not gonna just have to come see a bunch of limited site plans just for lighting nonconformity. So I think that should be something staff or enforcement can have that administrative review over. So that's it for me.
Yeah, so let's talk about the exemption a little bit for some of the adaptive lighting controls, because I got the impression from the minutes that there was some hesitation on of the minutes. Michelle, I think that came from you, so fill me in here if I'm wrong, that it might be more of a nuisance to have lights that are turning off and on as opposed to lighting that would be consistent.
If the idea is to have motion activation after an hour, if we're like saying these are the hours that lights can be on and then thereafter they can be motion activated, I think that's a bad idea. When they're off, they should be off. Particularly in areas that there's a lot of pedestrians or just a lot of activity. Yeah, I think having the hours is a better control, but I do, in terms of like efficiency, I understand using motion activation within the hours where lights can be on. I also have if I can, it's not a in the weeds question, it's more general. And actually maybe this is for you, Steve. I was watching the last council meeting and read the news article about this. Is there
Which one?
is there interest in like a police power lighting ordinance, or are we just looking at zoning?
From my understanding, we're just looking at zoning.
Okay.
I did also see like on there that they was claiming that the city was, like some news articles were claiming that the city was gonna go completely dark. That is not what a dark sky compliant ordinance is. That just means, just for the record, and for the recording, that just means that we're trying to limit lighting from shining unnecessarily into the sky. We still need lighting. That's still important. Just not shining it wastefully into the sky.
To your point, Josh brought this here because of previous conversations. We had Josh give a heads up presentation to council. Council hasn't requested this. Council is going like, oh, this is interesting. What do you guys think? And my message to Fox 2 News when they called me 10 minutes before they wanted an interview, and I wasn't even in town. I was still at work in Ann Arbor. Oh, can you meet us downtown? I was like, look, this is just the beginning. This is going to be going through the planning commission, things like that. And I know there's been several news outlets that have jumped on this as opposed to all the other stuff that's happening in the city. But so we don't have any expectations. We're looking for you guys to kind of clarify that, but it's basically just zoning. So
Okay. Yeah. Good to know.
Yeah.
Well, I understand that, well, for one, I'm wondering, what percentage of the city's streetlights are owned by DTE versus the city themselves?
That is something I would probably have to ask the DPW director. I do know that a pretty hefty amount are owned by DTE. So that includes like the streetlights along Michigan Avenue and Huron. That includes the lights that are in Frog Island. I'm imagining probably Riverside as well. I can ask the DPW director to see if she has any further records, but I would imagine a lot of them are.
Yeah, that would be my expectation as well. And I'm wondering, the city has to put these expectations on DTE. I do know that Ann Arbor was having some difficulty with DTE not wanting to carry two different kinds of lighting. I do believe that they have made some progress in that, so I wonder if Ann Arbor forcing DTE to adopt some new lighting might allow us to kind of piggyback off that same warehouse space.
You can, want me?
And
Please, yeah.
So this was brought up just in the context of Frog Island, right? Because that's the newest set of new lights, and they are not shielded. They're just straight up things like that. We would have to purchase new lights to replace those, and those are, I think, just for Frog Island, that was like 25 grand to do
That was
that.
250.
250 grand.
1,000.
Sorry.
Double check.
This is a-
Maybe per fixture.
Per fixture.
Yeah,
But then we would have to stock the replacement parts and, if we were going to have poles in, that in stock, we'd have to store them someplace. And that's an issue in terms of we're redoing the DPW yard, trying to figure out where those things would be stored. The basement of this building was proposed, things like that. So, that kind of conversation started, but it seems like it's going to be a significant outlay from our city budget to be able to convert these things. And so,
Well, and there's nothing about like this ordinance necessarily that forces conversion, right? There are going to be a lot of existing fixtures that are grandfathered in here, and I don't think that's a problem necessarily. I think if nothing else, it helps us to have a point where, from here on out, we are expecting that like new or modified lighting meets a certain standard. We've talked about this with site plan reviews 1,000 times before. So I think this brings some consistency to like new installations, even if there are instances like Frog Island or other DTE owned fixtures that might take a while to catch up.
right, and the concern, part of the concern from the presentation was that the city be compliant with our own rules, right? And that was noted that we are out of compliance with even that, so.
And yeah, reading on the Dark Sky website, I believe it actually had a clause that said that the Dark Sky ordinances aren't expected necessarily to expect replacement. Instead, it's just a new standard for when new installations are put in. And I'm curious because my understanding is that DTE, if they are owning the lights, are the ones that are supplying it. So will we be taking those lights over from DTE? Or is this perhaps something that we could modify within our franchise agreement with DTE?
From my understanding, I believe that DTE would still maintain the streetlights. We would just have to pay extra money to get these dark sky compliant light fixtures. And so, yeah, it would stay in the ownership, but we would have to pay extra money out of our budget to get that specific lighting. They don't offer it as an option presently.
If we're talking a zoning ordinance amendment, though, all the streetlights in the public right of way are outside of the purview of
That is,
what we're doing. So
that is true, yeah.
Yes.
I don't think it's an expectation of us necessarily that the city become compliant with the ordinance. I think that there's a lot of value in this ordinance that like,
Mhm.
I don't think the city budget for new streetlight fixtures should be a constraint on. And so, I know that that's a council question more than it's an us question, but do with that what you will.
Thank you.
One thing I also did want to mention, because that was a question that Commissioner Scheer had, is how did Ann Arbor address non-conforming lights? And ultimately, when they have new development proposals or significant alterations, that's when the light's expected to come into compliance with the ordinance. We already presently require that with dumpsters. So for section 122-608, it's a requirement that any new construction or significantly altered commercial use is required. They're required to provide a dumpster enclosure. And so that is language that we could consider as well in our own ordinance of any new development or altered commercial use is required to come into compliance with this ordinance. That is something to consider.
But
Yeah, and I think
we don't have to store replacement dumpsters.
I'm sorry.
So I think my understanding of it is that we would have to buy and store replacement lights for like both kinds of lights then if we're having two kinds of lights.
are you talking about for the city lights, or are you talking about for
For like site development.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
Good question. I was just on the Ann Arbor City Ordinance. I don't know what page it is, but it's it's in the nonconformities. Replacement of any nonconforming luminaire shall require compliance with the section. So I think that's really important because that is not just new site development. That's basically when your non-conforming light bulb breaks, you need to make it conforming. So I think the only other question, well, not my question, like, not question about the presentation specifically that's noted is, uh, currently, is there a process if a downtown, let's just say any business wants to put lighting around their storefront windows? Currently, do they need to get any sort of city permission to do that?
If it's like if the light is like flashing, then the city is like, hey, like that's not allowed, and code enforcement has enforced upon that. There's one specific challenge with downtown businesses, and that's the fact that oftentimes their properties just abut the right of way, and so we have these requirements where you can't exceed 0.5 foot candles at the property line, except they're already at the property line. And so the building code does require, not obviously this is like lighting in the window. That's not a requirement for building code, but building code does require for certain uses that you have a certain level of lighting at the entrance of a space. I don't know if it's for all commercial uses, but I know for sure for residential, like apartments and whatnot. And so I think that's something that we also have to consider is what does the building code say, and how do we want to, or how can the planning commission ensure that there isn't that excessive lighting from, lighting around the windows, but also for lighting that is directly on the right of way as well.
Want to put an unshielded LED light strip with the lights facing out onto the city, I can just install that with the tape and plug it in and be good to go.
Yes and no. The only bite the city would have in our ordinance to prevent that would be that the lighting can exceed 0.5 foot candles at the property line. But the other challenge is, oftentimes because of street lights as well, we don't have an accurate way to depict what that lighting is. One of the things we could potentially do is require a photometric plan, or just altogether make it language in the new ordinance, that is just something that's not permitted, period, because people are probably not wanting to spend thousands of dollars for a photometric plan or lighting strips.
Yeah, right. So I think that's my one, my concern with like any changes we do. I think that the LED light strips are becoming more and more acceleratingly popular, and they're never compliant with any sort of lighting code. So the city of Lansing code that you put in here, Josh, I think it's page 29 of 42. They talk about window lighting. I did look up on their code, just like luminous tube. They say a luminous tube and exposed bulb fluorescent lighting visible from the property line is prohibited unless it is part of a sign that meets the requirements of their sign section. I think that's great language. I think should consider adding exposed bulb fluorescent and exposed LED light emitting diode lighting as well, because if you Google these two things, they're not an LED light strip or light bulb at all. So I think that's something that would be really important for what we've been talking about in addition to the other things.
Let me ask this about the window lighting. The Ann Arbor ordinance has this section 5.25.4 for indoor lighting. Indoor lighting shall not be the source of exterior light, trespass, or glare as specified in section whatever. And I'm wondering, like, for window lighting, is that a good way to capture like the entirety of the window lighting that you're concerned about? Because like it is indoor, right? It's on the interior of the window, the bits that we're concerned about. And so if we just call it indoor lighting, that could potentially capture like is this an LED strip in the window? Is it just like super bright fluorescents in the building that are causing a glare outside of it? That might be a good like all-encompassing solution there. How do you feel about that as it relates to window lighting?
I think that would make sense. I think either or is a good approach. Yeah, it was a little hard for me to capture. I felt like reading the Ann Arbor one was a little bit more nuanced in trying to gather all these things where the second one had specific call out of
Yeah.
types. So
That bit
But-
that I read is the entirety of that indoor lighting. It is very
Yeah.
broad.
yeah. So but no, I think that would be acceptable.
Okay.
I hope. So I think we would take a draft ordinance and then Michelle could try to figure out how to get through with get a lighting fixture through, and we can talk about that in the next one.
Sweet.
When it comes to draft language for this, are there any other questions? Like, I feel like we have general consensus on like the shielding, on the color limit, on the light trespass, on the flashing and blinking or moving lights, on the indoor window lighting. You're going to be the one that's like putting pen to paper on draft language. What else do you need from us?
The one other question I have would be the exemptions. In, I believe it's Ann Arbor's ordinance, they have exemptions for historic lighting specifically. In our zoning ordinance, we also have exemptions for historic properties that are non-conforming. Like, so if there's something that's non-conforming and somebody wants to restore it as part of the historic structure, they have the ability to do so. They would have to get approval from the Historic District Commission. But that is something to consider, especially because this is specifically regulated through or defined through the Secretary of Interior standards. And so this is a federal government, you know, these are federal government standards to encourage historic preservation. So that's just one thing to consider, is that potentially that exemption, maybe in the language we could include something regarding that that needs explicit approval from the Historic District Commission. But again, the HDC also, they have these lighting standards. They have a lighting standard page where any new lighting in the historic district is required to be dark sky compliant and be downward facing. So that's an interesting concept. So someone could restore lighting that is historic, but if it's not historic and somebody wants to propose new lighting, it has to be dark sky compliant, essentially. Like, it's like facing downwards, shielded, all that. So kind of like we have across that see King and Co. over their sign. That was a requirement specifically from the Historic District Commission to have lighting that is compliant.
So if their standards are more strict, or if they end up being more strict, why would we need to offer an exemption?
I think the fact sheet, oh, sorry, Josh. I think the fact sheet is for new,
Correct.
non-historic replication, like non-historic replacement. So if you never had a historic lighting fixture, then it's
Oh.
it's more restrictive than what we currently have. If you have a historic fixture, then it's exempted from dark sky.
Per HDC approval,
Yeah.
they could make a decision to not allow it.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of examples in the city of historic lighting that is already not, a lot of it's not conforming, but we don't have a lot of existing or historic lighting in the city in general that's going to be non-conforming, even if they decide to go through that process of getting HDC approval to do so. I know maybe the closest thing we have to it is the library. They have the lighting out front, which isn't dark sky compliant. I believe the light fixtures are mimicking fixtures that were there in the 1920s. But that's one of the very few exceptions that I've seen. So if the planning commission is interested in that exemption, that's something to consider. The other one is seasonal lighting. There are ordinances that require that you can have seasonal lighting out from this time of year to this time of year. But then it has to be shut off at this time of night. That's something to consider as well. But then there's also, we have, I don't don't know I don't know if it's just like decorative lighting. Like Sidetrack, they have the decorative lighting over their outdoor patio. Is that something the planning commission wants to grant exemptions for, or kind of set purviews regarding that as well? So those are kind of the three exemptions that I've seen that I don't know how the planning commission feels.
Sure. So if we can take that first one
Mhm.
and just like let's play out how that looks for the library, because I think I'm having a hard time like just putting the pieces together what that process looks like. So before recent renovations, the library had lighting that was still in the style of the original 1920s, or they had previously changed it and were non-compliant.
I believe they were already non-compliant, but they're not exactly as is what was there in the 1920s, but they're similar. If that
And
makes
then
sense.
they've continuously been that way since.
Yeah, and the HDC did approve it because they were similar. It is something they reviewed, I believe, within the last year.
Okay, so if this lighting ordinance, if Ann Arbor's lighting ordinance, let's say word for word is adopted, and the library is going to do those renovations, there is a blanket exemption in the zoning ordinance for historic district commission exceptions, right? And if they get approval from the historic district commission for the lighting, then whether we make an exemption for historic lighting or not doesn't make a difference in the outcome.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know that I understand the scenario that would make a difference in the outcome, whether or not we say that we're putting in an exemption for historical lighting.
I think, yes, I think it would basically be maybe if the Historic District Commission decides to stop considering lighting, which would be probably an exceptional case because it is part of the Secretary of Interior standards. So because we have a historic district, it could be, this may be redundant. That's a good point.
I'm kind of the opinion, I don't think it makes sense for us to address exemptions for historic fixtures at all. It feels like that's already adequately addressed.
Do you think it'd be beneficial to include it for ease of read? Maybe instead reference, for historic lighting, reference the section where it allows nonconformities for historic properties?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I don't think that's a problem.
That makes sense.
I had a question.
Please.
I may have missed it. I didn't see anything in any of the ordinances that requires solar power.
They do, I didn't see anything either that requires solar power. So I don't think that's a general requirement in those ordinances.
I was thinking that all advertising that's not safety related, such as advertising, would require solar power. And I didn't see anything that said when you have to turn lights off, such as advertising running 24/7.
Oh, you're talking about like if we have like EMBs and people and they're on for the entire time. Are you referencing like having nighttime hours? For that?
Yes.
I believe I thought we did include that in our.
I think it does.
I could be wrong, but I.
Clear, is your concern with lighting fixtures, or is it with like the message boards? Is that more related to what Mike's talking about with like window lighting?
All of it.
All of it, okay.
In our ordinance, specifically section 122-665 C, it requires that electronic message boards shall not be illuminated between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. So if you guys see that happening, let me know ASAP.
I have not seen it.
I saw,
We report to you.
yeah.
Definitely reports so.
Does that answer your question regarding
Yes.
advertisement? But you had a question about solar panels.
We allowed a church to put a small message board And it just slipped me in my mind, it should have been solar power. It could be a requirement and
For the Sustainability Commission to weigh in on that aspect.
I think, is that something that we would like to potentially ask them?
Well, I don't know, because in terms of the practical application of regulations for exterior lighting, it doesn't always make sense to require solar power, because what if it's on a what if it's a north facing wall mounted light? But I could see like requiring it for pole mounted lights on projects of certain scales.
Mm.
I mean, I'm sure the Sustainability Commission would have something to say, but this feels like a zoning thing.
Like freestanding,
Right, right.
freestanding lighting versus building mounted, that makes,
I feel like there'd have to be some discretion involved though.
that doesn't, yeah, it's not always well, it's not cut and dry at all with when it makes sense, so.
Would it be worth, I know that in our ordinance, we have that, we cap light poles at 16 feet. Would it be worth, and you know, it provides planning commission the discretion to increase the height of that pole for commercial and industrial uses? Would it be worth maybe in the event that somebody requests poles beyond 16 feet, that they are then required to have solar lighting? Is that something that you would be comfortable with, Commissioner Shear?
yes.
Okay. So that, yeah, that's definitely something we can look into including as well.
And then my last question with the exemptions that you asked about, I think all of the ordinances that are included in here address under canopy lighting. And I know that like gas station lighting is kind of the first example that's provided. Would that capture the example you're asking about for sidetrack too?
I was not thinking about that particularly. I was not thinking about the under canopy lighting in terms of sidetrack. I was just thinking like, I know that there are restaurants that like to have that exterior lighting, especially in Depot Town, you know, during the summer when people are out at night eating. Um, yeah. Does that answer your question?
But can I ask a question based off that? Would, so the temporary light installation,
Mm.
I didn't go down this route, so is there, when you were doing your research, is there a permit application or anything needed for that? So, you know, maybe for the sidetracks and other situations, the temporary lighting installation could be the way to look at that. If you're putting patio lighting on for 90 days, you turn it off after 90 days. And then, you know, when your next time it makes sense for the patio to be on,
Mhm.
you have another 90 days. And that doesn't seem like, seems reasonable. I don't want to encourage business owners to have a 10-foot candle under canopy lighting in their patios. So I'm going to say that maybe those ones should be considered temporary lighting use.
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
maybe special, like, sorry. Go.
there is already like some language about like wall mounted floodlights, right? That is like
Mhm.
allowed as long as it complies with shielding and light trespass limits. And so I feel like the only thing that doesn't really fit in there is like if you have like string lights,
Mhm.
right? String lights are kind of the issue
Mhm.
that I just don't know if they're addressed very effectively anywhere.
I've not really seen, I've seen that for the most part, they're just exempted. It's not something that communities tend to really regulate. I mean, I think like if it's one of those things where they're just really bright
Mhm.
LED lights are flashing all these different types of colors, the ordinances then regulate them. But when you have those string lights, they don't tend to be as intense. Um, and so, yeah, not really sure how the planning commission would like to address that, or just not address it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't strike me that it's a particular problem, but I think if we're talking about, like, when I look at Ann Arbor's lighting ordinance, I think it restricts that. I don't think there is a way that you could hang up a string light on a patio under Ann Arbor's lighting ordinance,
Mm,
right?
Um, I don't believe so, but everybody does downtown.
Right.
Like when you're in downtown, you see it everywhere. At all the time. So I'm not sure if that's something that they really enforce.
Or maybe it's a question to their zoning admin staff of like, okay, we looking at your ordinance, we don't see how it's permitted. Why, are you just not enforcing it? Because I don't, to your point, Matt, I don't want to create a thing that like we're just immediately not enforcing.
Right.
So maybe it's like seasonality is where something like that falls in. You don't like that, okay? Sorry, Amanda. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that their exemption is the seasonal exemption. Am I looking at Ann Arbor right now? Am I looking? Yeah. So I don't know if that's how they would get those through there, but or if it's about safety. I mean, I think like the lighting on a patio where people are eating is kind of necessary. There might be places that there's an exemption that makes sense.
Seasonality, any temporary light installation, because like in the Ann Arbor rules, the seasonality and the temporary light are the same thing, right? There is no like separate bit on seasonality. So Ann Arbor is ruling with just this temporary lighting rule, which says that a temporary light installation on a private property is permitted for a total of 90 consecutive days in one calendar year. And so essentially what they're saying is that this is like holiday lighting. It's like 90 days is not enough to be like necessarily, summer lighting if it's like
Mhm.
a business patio. I don't think that string lighting on business patios is a problem, and I don't want to create a problem for that where like none exists now.
Could we, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, I'm interested in ways to try to resolve.
Right.
It. I don't know what the answer
If
is.
we could like build in some standards around the exemption, like seasonal lighting that complies with color temperature, like the things that we care about, illumination levels are exempt, then we don't have to regulate sidetracks. string
Yeah.
lights.
Yes.
But also we're not ignoring the ordinance.
Yeah.
Because I feel like holiday lights change every single year about what's popular.
Mhm.
Who knows, like next year everything could be like super bright green. Like we don't know. We probably don't want that or whatever. So if instead of just seasonal lighting and leave it vague, still build in some standards that match our ordinance.
Yeah.
Like require like string lighting, if it's on a patio to, be of a certain color temperature and Kelvin essentially.
Like seasonal lights that comply with these sections of the ordinance that
Mm.
regulate this, this, and this are exempt from regulation.
Okay.
And it's weird because you're adding regulations, but you're exempting them from having to apply.
Yeah.
But ordinances do that sometimes.
I was to say that's regulation right there.
Yeah.
Yes. As a government employee, that is how you write it. That's how you got to do it. I think that's a really great suggestion. Thank you.
Anything else that needs to be said about the coming dark sky lighting ordinance?
That one's not compliant. The one that just came on is glaring into my view. We found another one.
We'll let DT.
Yep.
We found another one added to the list.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. This is a great discussion. Seems like we're all kind of on the same page for once, right?
Easy money. All right, we're going to move on to tenting and safe parking ordinance discussion. I'll turn it over to staff again for a presentation.
Yeah, so let me pull up the memo. So, you want, or council, they passed a resolution directing the planning commission to look at the zoning code with regard to safe tenting and safe parking to explore the possibilities at work. The planning commission during their February 19th meeting, the resolution was brought forth, to consider how this can move forward. Staff ran into some slight issues, one of which is being that any proposed language needs to have a public hearing, and it can be less than 15 days. And so we would have had to public notice the following Tuesday. So that was less than a week from the planning commission meeting. Then I ended up having the flu, so I was out the entire week. So I was not able to public notice for the ordinance. But essentially, I went through, I know that we discussed the amendments to temporary structures. One of the things that staff wanted to point out is currently all temporary structures are required, you're required to pull a permit. And that was one thing that was brought up, is that people who are experiencing a homelessness are probably not going to be pulling permits for temporary structures. And so how would the planning commission then, how would the planning commission then permit this through zoning? What would that look like? Because presently a permit would be required for any temporary structure. The other things to consider would be parking. The ordinance requires that vehicle storage facilities, they must be within a building or be in an area that is presently approved as a special land use to be vehicle storage. The other thing to consider is that, the regulations for vehicle storage facilities and where they're located, and the regulations that the zoning ordinance has that has required for any type of vehicle storage facility. The other things to consider truthfully would be ordinances, other ordinances that are not within the zoning ordinance. Obviously, we can't amend anything that is outside of the zoning ordinance, but that is just something to consider, maybe perhaps a memo to council of like, these are the code sections that need to change concurrently with zoning regulations in order to make this a possibility. And so staff is definitely wanting the planning commission to also look at, consider, different things like landscaping, parking, lighting, trash receptacles, form-based codes, all of that. Because again, any temporary structure, a lot of temporary structures, if they're at a site for a specific period of time, they do have to comply with a lot of these standards. But then we also need to consider the master plan. Any zoning amendment needs to comply with the master plan. And so anything that that the planning commission is wanting to amend, we need to ensure that it is meeting those master plan standards as well. So.
Lots of things to consider.
A suggestion.
Please.
This is covered in the master plan under shelter. There are 5 references to shelter in the master plan. It comes up predominantly under complete neighborhoods, and it comes up under resiliency of neighborhoods. It's a midterm goal. I think if we consider this as tenting or as a parking problem, we're misguiding the council. It doesn't fit under, this whole idea doesn't fit under the master plan as tenting or a parking issue. I think the problems of health and safety and sanitation become insurmountable if you try to do this. So my recommendation is follow the master plan, deal with it as a midterm goal, with it as a shelter issue, and abandon any thoughts of amending the ordinances to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish.
So if one of the questions we're being asked is, can it work?
Hmm.
Your answer is no.
No.
Meeting, right? Disclaimer again, that I know there's been discussion of this that I wasn't party to. And so, I'm open to getting caught up on kind of where we're at on the discussion right now. I can't see a solution that involves allowing temporary structures on an unpermitted basis. Right? Temporary structures on a permitted basis, we've like gone to great lengths to try to like limit and provide guidance for so that it's not, a burden and it's not a problem. And unpermitted temporary structures feels like a challenge to most parts of the master plan. Thing.
Been able to read the entirety of the master plan yet, but I'm slowly working my way through it. But I do note that there is a core value of the master plan that anyone of any, regardless of age or income level, should be able to find housing within Ypsilanti. Whether we allow it or disallow it, tenting is going to continue in this city. The legal, the legality of it, the liability aspect of it is probably a thorny issue, and I don't know if I have clarity on the way to move forward there. However, it certainly seems like something that's worthwhile to attempt to find some resolution on. The sanitation, the health issues, these are real issues, but they're real issues regardless of where it's happening. However, if we were to be able to allow for some zoning and some regulation around it, we may be able to mitigate those issues rather than let them just go unmitigated. It seems to me like it isn't really a matter of like, are we allowing this or disallowing this? It's a matter of, are we going to regulate or not regulate it? And in that sense, I think that regulating it is probably going to lead to a better outcome.
Still missed the February meeting, so if there's context that I'm missing, please feel free to fill me in, but where exactly this is coming from, because if we're talking about public land, then do we even have any ability to zone it, or is that
To an extent, the city owns land across all different types of zoning ordinances. The main one that we have ownership of are the parks,
Yeah.
which we do have a zoning district that defines parks and what's allowed in the park zoning districts. But truthfully, the zoning in the parks, because the city owns them, there's not a ton that when the city does anything in those parks, they're not particularly looking at the zoning ordinance. It's more like general code
can't they just do what they please?
for the most part. Yeah.
Right, so that's my point, is like, I don't know that it's a question to our table if we're talking about public. And then if we're talking about private land, I'm not sure what we're talking about, because I don't know of a private landowner that's asking us to.
As far as I'm aware, there's, do you know otherwise, Steve? I don't know if there's a private landowner who is asking this. I think this is something that council was interested in looking at because the city is moving forward with developing Water Street, and we are presently working on clearing brush, and so there were people that were tenting at Water Street, and so to ensure that nobody gets hurt, there were signs that went up notifying people like, hey, you need to vacate the premises. There will be clearing brush and pursuing remediation of Water Street.
The other thing, like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That is true. And so there were measures taken to relocate those folks during the cold weather. And so there was a storage unit that was placed there. People were hoteled to a certain extent. There is certainly one person that does not want to be in a shelter, in a hotel, or housed any other way than camping. So there have been some accommodations for that person to move elsewhere, but it hasn't been specified. There is no private landowner that has stepped forward to offer property for this.
And if the city were to take some portion of public land and make it a camping place, then they would have to provide a lot of things to make it a legit campground, in terms of sanitation and
The city is exempted from its own ordinances. I don't know if there would be state or like federal requirements as a result. I would, there could be. I honestly, the truth.
feels like liability of issue of like the city allowing unsafe. In terms of like not enforcing the no camping when possible. But I just don't see a way that we can say like this is legally allowed and we're not going to provide anything that'll make it safe to do.
Sorry, real quick, Michelle, you had something halfway.
When we discussed this in February, we were talking about how there was both the urgent need because of the folks on Water Street and the long-term potential changes to the zoning code or the general code. Are we, Steve, do we still need to consider the urgent changes, or are we just looking at this long-term now?
Both. So at that
Okay.
meeting, you had proposed loose enforcement as the short-term urgent.
Or changing the language a little bit, yeah. Not loose enforcement.
Well, changing the enforcement anyway, but yes, and to Carl's point, when I started looking at this, I went and looked at municipal campgrounds. In the traditional sense, where you could pull up an RV, there's a toilet, there's a shower, there's this and that and the other thing, water, electricity available, and all of those kinds of things. I personally, and I'm not speaking for all of council when I say this, have been looking at other places where camping has become a ad hoc solution to homelessness, and specifically Olympia, Washington, and it's a fiasco. And every other place that I've seen, it has become a sanitary and health issue. So I don't want to create that situation either, but
Another thought, and I'm not trying to pivot the conversation to parking. I just want to address this because.
Real quick, before we go to your
No,
other thought,
okay, yeah.
Mike had something on this one. Can we jump back to you?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question based off of Amanda's point. So, the way you phrase that makes me want to ask, so could the city administration decide that they want to have a campground on any particular city-owned property, and they could have a unilateral campground decided by the city manager as part of executive fiat? If we're not able to set up zoning ordinances that are enforceable on city-owned land?
Because the city is, I can't fully speak. I would think we would probably need to talk to Randy, our attorney.
Okay. That your point just took me down this rabbit hole of like, well, hold on a second. So could any part of the city just become a campground at the decree at any moment? So,
We would need to talk to the attorney, but
okay.
you know, the city again is generally exempted from its own ordinances. You know, it's especially like with vehicle storage and whatnot, we're not required to follow the same standards as our ordinance. And so as a result, the city, like in any public, you know, any land that's owned by the city, they could park really wherever their vehicles wherever and whatnot. So I would imagine there would be that discretion, but I don't fully know what that would look like.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's pivot.
The way I would interpret vehicle storage facilities would not include parking at all. Because we're talking about long-term storage, and that's not what safe parking is. They're not there long-term and they're occupied. I don't think safe parking is covered under zoning whatsoever. I think it's a general code and it's not up to us to suggest any type of amendment to the zoning ordinance to cover safe parking. We don't regulate, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like there's a I'm getting general input from folks on the commission that like, though we understand the nature of the problem, it doesn't feel like a zoning problem, right? Like, because we have whatever we talk about on parks doesn't impact the city's ability to execute any plans on parks, right? The city's exempt from its own ordinance. So essentially, we are like powerless to execute any change in parks. And so what we're talking about is private spaces. And I don't think that there is a way for us to talk about like tenting or parking on private spaces for the purpose of like, mitigating these short and medium term effects of homelessness that doesn't invalidate a lot of like the existing structure of the zoning ordinance and like and what our goals of the zoning ordinance are, right? And so I'm still open to hearing like a solution that is a zoning solution, but I feel like we're using the wrong tool, right? I don't think that zoning is the tool here.
Create a new zone and define what that zone is and what can be permitted on it in detail.
Yeah, that's interesting. They don't necessarily need to tell us, but our zoning map is part of our adopted master plan, right? But at the maps in the master plan, like I don't know.
Referring to like the future land use map.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's not like the zoning map necessarily. It's like the city framework map, which feels like a different thing. It would be hard to create a zone that like we could do that is not like directly opposed to like the current language of the master plan.
I don't think so. I mean, I think you brought up that our current master plan says everybody has a right to live in Ypsilanti. So
Mhm.
if we were to create a zoning that is specifically for tenting, that is consistent with the master plan. Now, am I saying I want to do that? Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. I think that might be the only mechanism that really would be consistent with the discussions that you guys are having tonight.
I feel like if there was a tenting zone, then to be consistent with the master plan, it would have to cover health and safety issues. So that zone would have to be built into, sanitary challenges. And yeah, so I guess for me, I'm like, if there's a private interest that wants to create something like that, that makes sense. If we're talking about public land, we need to talk to the attorney about whether or not we can even do it. 'Cause I can't imagine us like carving out a zone of our parks to,
Mechanism that I've heard. And like,
That goes way beyond us.
well,
I think I should say that wouldn't be something maybe we would direct.
it isn't something we would
Take
do
it
unless
on.
we had like a very specific space
Mm.
that we were looking to do it in.
Yes, that's a better way to say it.
I think we're learning why there's a reason we weren't able to find any model ordinances.
Right.
I haven't particularly found anything online of like of zoning like really, like a zoning ordinance that has had a ton of success.
Right.
Throughout the country where tenting has been permitted
Mhm.
and the state government has withheld funding as a result.
Hmm.
Especially in Georgia, that occurred in Georgia.
Does the general code speak to tents at all?
It just doesn't allow camping on public land.
Okay.
I thought it wasn't specific to that, but in terms of park, you can't be there between certain hours. They're closed, right? So that precludes camping at night anyway, so.
what Michelle said about parking and like vehicle storage being different things. I think if we have a play here, it is a play with temporary structures, and like it I think would be an undertaking, but it feels like a zone separate from parks. Um, and I feel like I have to think through like the domino effect, like the unintended consequences of that. But that feels like the only viable solution that I've heard from this from a zoning perspective, something that we have control on that can like affect some change here.
Safe parking seems like a program thing. I emailed you, Josh, and I send you so many emails, so I'm sure.
No, I appreciate.
Oh, okay.
it.
We have so many parking lots that are underutilized. We have a lot of churches, and that's an opportunity for a lot of partnerships for safe parking. A lot of those churches have gates on them. So I think I see this more as a program thing than a changing the code thing.
Mentioned Mount Olive, right?
Oh, yeah, just because, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So they have.
They got a nice
very-
gate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steps. Where does that leave us? I don't think that gives you a lot to work with.
No, it does. So the ask was, at least from my perspective, was to consider it.
Mhm.
Does it work? Is there a mechanism to put this in place? When I thought about it, I thought about all the sanitation requirements, permitting, which is, I've said, people who are tenting are not really the kind of people that go to City Hall and get a permit anyway, but and just the surveillance for safety issues, right? So you're gonna have to have police presence, you're gonna have to have, toilets and water and all those things that you would expect. And the question was, yeah, I think you've answered the questions, right? Is it possible within our zoning code to achieve these things? Is it possible within the master plan? And there were, the question of the parks was brought up by Mr. Jones Chance at the last meeting. And he was just like, well, let him do it, but I don't see that flying. And then when I suggested a particular site, a lot of those sites are in floodplains and are not necessarily amenable to that, and they're all regularly traveled places, which is not consistent with the desires for people who are tenting. So it's like, but the ask was really consider it, see if there's a way that we can do something about this. And if the answer is no, and other things need to be considered, then that's what we take back. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of other things to consider, right? I think that some of the camping restrictions, some of the parking things feel like they're not zoning at all. If anything here is zoning, it is, I think, identifying a specific space, and it might be a unique district for an individual parcel that like is the solution there. And like, I don't know that that's a good solution from a zoning perspective, but like it might be the only one that we have. Right. But I don't think that planning commission is going to take that up without a space that makes sense for it, because like there's not going to be, I don't think there's a way that we just start designating parts of the city like a different zone for this purpose. Yeah.
I do wonder though, if, theoretically a parcel could be found that and if there would be some possibility of working with some nonprofit groups. There are nonprofit groups that work with homeless communities. Washington Camp Outreach comes to mind.
Sure.
To allow them to intervene in some way to alleviate some of these health and safety issues, right? I do wonder if that's a potential path forward here.
We do have communications with WCO, specifically about the folks on Water Street, but also they monitor the folks that are on the property north of Forest. And that's city-owned property, but it's not condoned by the city, anything like that. So they're out there on a regular basis helping those folks. But it doesn't rise to the level of what's being asked of this commission, right? So it's kind of like, turn a blind eye kind of thing, and they're certainly out there helping people and we're in communication. So, but, to Carl's point, the master plan has addressed this in a midterm way to get shelter, and we're working on that as well. So, given that there are folks who will never engage in shelter programs, right? And so that's kind of where we are. But then that's a pretty small group of people that I think there may be other means within the community to address that without it being an official city policy. Just my opinion, but I think you've done what I think council has asked you to do. And so any report back from Josh about what's happened here is it's good information. So
Would you like me to write a memo and run it by, I can either run it by planning commission next month and have you all vote to approve that memo, or I can run it by UMAT and or I could even like send an email to all of you guys, BCCU, and then if you have any comments or concerns, let me know, and if not, then send that to.
I would prefer to not wait until next month to communicate that with council, since some of this is a matter of urgency.
Could we try to make a motion?
Motion right now. Yeah, we could certainly entertain a motion.
Okay. I make a motion to recommend to city council that we respectfully I don't want to say like decline to amend the zoning ordinance, but I make a motion. Why did I suggest this?
Feeling real brave.
Make a motion to recommend to council that they review the minutes of this meeting. No,
To pursue
to pursue general code or policy or city programs.
Or the city, or the master plan. It's in the master plan. What they've asked for is already
Right.
part of the master plan.
So as a policy document, we're gonna recommend that they pursue another policy outside of zoning in order to address the concerns with tenting and safe parking. Good luck with that, Josh. Sorry.
I will make it sound as nice as humanly possible. But I can also, again, like when I write that memo, I can run it by all of you guys. I have the title of the memo, and if any concerns, just about anything, let me know. And then once I have that, did you want me to just email that to you, Steve? And then you can forward that to council, or should I give that to Tracy?
you can go through straight to Tracy. Okay. So either you as the staff liaison or I as the council liaison can forward that up to council.
I think what Commissioner Marin is suggesting is that there isn't a staff memo here, that the
Oh.
language of her motion
Yeah.
be
So let me start
communication
over.
directly to council.
I'll say it and then it can just go. I'd like
No
to.
way.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that city council pursue policy, general policies, programs, or changes to the general code rather than zoning ordinance changes in order to address concerns with safe parking and tenting pursuant to our discussion at the February and March Planning Commission meetings.
Offer an
Please.
amendment. So my amendment, I want to offer a suggestion of an amendment and get help from the table on what this might be. But I feel like we need some kind of acknowledgement of our reasoning. It is what I would.
Being outside of the purview of zoning regulations. Based on our discussion. So can we just shove that phrase in there, right? Based on our, there's a recording of this, right? You're not gonna, okay. Okay, well, listen to that and then plug in before I said.
Okay.
Before
Yeah,
I said,
I mean, I do think that that captures the reasoning that's been shared. Is there anything else specific, like for the justification? Because we've talked about all
Is
the
there an
ways in which
amendment?
like the recommendations here don't fit in with zoning. I think that captures the justification well enough.
Is there, oh, no worries. Is there space to at least acknowledge the fact that, you know, the discussion that was had around if there was a plan for some specific area of, the city that could work for this, then that could be, reconsidered at that time?
Yeah, do we start the conversation?
of the word temporary. Because we're talking about, there was the urgency here and we're addressing the fact that we don't want to alter the zoning ordinance to address the urgent need.
Well, we also are kind of talking about not changing the zoning ordinance for the permanent need, right? Because the permanent need, I think, is better served by some of the other goals of the master plan. I think what Greg is suggesting here is that like we haven't ruled out the possibility of a new location.
Do we want to say that like at this time, we do not see how this fits under our purview on, you know, according to,
Maybe with our motion and with our liaison, we can get the picture across.
I think it's a fair question that Michelle can consider as an amendment to her motion or not, as she so chooses. That's fair. Can I summarize?
Can you? I don't
So-
even know.
There is a motion that we respond here as a body to council, to note that it is not in our purview to address some of the housing and parking challenges discussed here within the responsibilities of the planning commission. We have one friendly amendment that's noted that our justification for that is just that it is outside of our powers, right? The second friendly amendment that has been proposed is that we open the door to a future district in the zoning map that can be specific to tenting. I don't think there is any consensus yet on whether that friendly amendment get included in this motion. Is that
It seems like we've barely scratched at a discussion on changing the zoning map. And I don't want to include it in the motion, like haphazardly. And also I think if we just, like the phrasing of based on our discussions, if anyone's curious about our discussions in detail, like the videos are posted online.
It will be on.
And we have our wonderful liaison. And so I'm going to respectfully not include the friendly amendments. And
plural?
we'll see how you, yeah, both.
Okay.
No amendments, just based on our discussion at the February-March Planning Commission meetings.
I have one question. Is there any reason we need to make this a motion and not do the memo? Like, what's the benefit of the?
Could we close the motion before we have that?
Well, it hasn't been
Hasn't been supported.
yet,
Motion.
which is why, like, I'm
So-
clarify that before we do that so that we don't have to if we don't have.
So there's a non-seconded motion on the floor right now?
Yes.
Okay.
So is there a reason why a motion is more helpful to you than the memo that you talked about?
The motion is definitely more clean cut, like, hey, this is what's happening, this is how what the planning commission, this is what they are wanting to do moving forward. And I mean, a memo can just be a little bit more in depth. Either way, I'm indifferent as to how the planning commission would like.
Clean cut is generous. I, with some of the complications here, memos feeling like an attractive option.
I just
But
don't want to go.
right now, we do have an unseconded motion, and like the rest of the commission can do with that as they please. Do we have a second? action. And I think the resolution here then is that the rest of the commission will settle for a memo. Not the rest of the commission, like Michelle doesn't get the memo. Michelle will get the memo. The
Oh, I get the
commission will
memo.
settle for,
Not personal.
If I may,
please.
so you addressed the urgency, and so that is driving this, right?
Yes.
So the urgency of Water Street has come and gone, right? They can't be there, but they need to be someplace else, and the camping situation has been what it is in other places for a very long time. So that urgency is not, there's not an enforcement issue. That's not an issue. So to me, it's like, if you need the time to make a clear statement about this being beyond it, that there's something in the master plan, and this is beyond the scope of zoning, then I'd say make the clear statement however you're gonna make it, and then we'll go with that.
For me,
Okay. Anything else that needs to be said about the tenting and safe parking ordinance? Very good. I appreciate everybody's input on this. The next item on the agenda under new business is master plan consideration.
Wait, I apologize. The motion, so we had a motion.
Right, it was
It was
unseconded.
unseconded. Okay.
Mhm.
okay.
There was
Thought
no
we were-
motion, that was just discussion.
So
Yes.
the planning commission, what do you want me to do?
Well, so it, just to be clear, I think there is a general consensus that like what is being asked here for tenting and safe parking is outside of the zoning scope, right?
Mhm.
Our scope of influence. And so we would like you to draft the memo and share it via email with the commission for our input before sharing with the clerk for transmittal to council. The motion not being seconded, if I can speak for the other commissioners, was not an issue of disagreeing with the intent of the motion, but wanting to see it in writing before voting on it, or rather not voting on it, but consenting to it.
Perfect. Thank you.
are we waiting until the next meeting to, okay, so then this will really just be a memo from staff that we get eyes on and can tell Josh.
You
But-
should receive it sometime next week, most likely. It's spring, so we are getting a lot of volume presently, so it'll take a little bit longer, but you'll have it by the latest at the end of next week.
Okay.
If there's anything like substantive in there that one of us is like, oh no, this isn't what I meant, then it could become a problem because we'd have to put it back on an open meeting and discuss it then.
Yeah, I don't expect that like everybody needs to approve of this for it to get sent, but I think everybody needs an opportunity to oppose it. And if there is opposition, then we come back to this meeting next month to discuss it.
So if there is like any just major opposition, then I will bring the memo.
Yeah, because if it's not agreed upon, then it's like we should vote on it, right? To make sure that we have majority.
But if it's treated just like how you would report out minutes, then it couldn't really be opposed. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to think of the ways to get it through to council as quickly as
I
possible.
mean, minutes could get.
Right, but I'm saying like, if someone's not here and they're like, I don't agree, one of the commissioners that isn't present, they could not agree, but also the memo is still reflecting what was discussed here today.
Actions you take. I give a report at every council meeting.
Great.
My,
Cool.
as a liaison, so I can give the gist of that, and I will certainly, Josh, and I will discuss what I say in that, but that's kind of where I am. It's like, I understand the limitations of this approach to answer the question.
Have a beautiful memo for y'all at some point next week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Master plan consideration.
So not much here. I kind of discussed it a little bit earlier, but essentially per the Planning and Enabling Act, we're required to update our master plan every 5 years, or review it and determine whether or not we amend or we adopt the current master plan or adopt a whole new master plan. The present master plan was adopted in 2013 and it was updated in 2021, which was not compliant. And I wanted to avoid that this year or this time. So I would like the planning commission to determine whether or not we would like to amend and readopt the current master plan, or adopt an entirely new master plan. The budget, now, from my understanding, the budgets are proposed in May and then approved in June and then go in effect in July.
Mhm.
Yeah, so planning department would like planning commission to provide staff direction as to whether or not we want to just do tweaks to the current master plan or do an entire overhaul. And then based on what the planning commission would like, the planning department would then have to bring forward proposals to council, like especially if we're proposing a complete overhaul, expensive, so we'll have to have that budgeted for the following. We'll have to do it regardless as to whether or not we adopt a whole brand new master plan or do any amendment. There will still be resident participation. There will still be all the opportunities for public comments and whatnot. It's just we know like if we do minor amendments, we're going to be looking at something that's going to be a lot cheaper versus a complete overhaul, which could honestly put us in the direction of about 200,000.
I didn't understand the part about the budget, but uh, does city council intend to give the city planning department the money if we want to do a new update?
Well, we know that we could get 50,000 from MEDC, guaranteed. But well, it's guaranteed, but that's kind of secret, and I said that on a public meeting, so I apologize. But the however, the council, I mean, it is ultimately their discretion as to whether or not to provide that funding. This is just more direction for staff to kind of see what we can prepare and then bring this forward in the event that council does not approve that amendment, then we'll have to take a serious look at and then what are our next steps moving forward, and then have the planning commission discuss that from there. One of the big things to kind of look at is look at our guiding values, honestly, look at the entire master plan, see what you all feel needs to be updated, look at the current goals and whatnot. There are things in there like having a permanent farmers market in Depot Town. We have one in downtown now, but I believe that that's not an intention anymore per Growing Hope to have a permanent one in Depot Town. So that's maybe something to consider. Another one would be, well, there's just many things to consider. So whatever, anything that planning commission would like to amend, anything they'd like to add, that's just something to start considering moving forward and whether or not that would require minor amendments or complete overhaul. So.
Well, I don't know how the other two commissioners that were here when the plan was updated in 2021. Looking at you, Commissioner Dunwoody and Commissioner Hollyfield. But being performed in the heart of the pandemic and trying to do online public engagement, I think was not successful in the slightest. I can't even remember if we got any citizen comments on the update. So I would be in favor of a full, we're talking over 10 years since a new master plan.
Mhm.
I would be in support of a full.
Yeah, and with that last one, we did start the update effort
The
on time.
yes, yes.
Because that 5-year cycle would have been due in 2018. And so prior to that update in 2018 was the seating of the subcommittee on affordability and accessibility. That was kind of the pressing issue for the master plan update at the time. A lot of the findings of that subcommittee are reflected in this master plan update. The sustainability plan was added into this as a chapter of the master plan instead of a freestanding plan on its own as part of those discussions. Both of those things held up some of the publishing of the plan. Having been on the subcommittee for housing affordability and accessibility, we did get a lot of public input, right? Most of that was carried out before the onset of the pandemic. And so even if this wasn't published until 2021, a lot of that groundwork had been laid. with that said, that's not to say that like there isn't value. I was here for the update to this master plan that was published in 2021. I was not here for the adoption of this master plan in 2013. I'm also not a planner by trade, and so I'd lean on others on this commission. It was kind of my understanding the last time around that it is like general best practice to do an overhaul of this every 2 cycles. Is that like a review on a 5-year cycle and like an overhaul on a 10-year cycle? Is that that clearly, if that were like MEDC guideline, then we would be getting sorry, not I was I'm getting work stuff confused with planning stuff. The Planning Enabling Act, if that were Planning Enabling Act guidelines, then it would be indicated here, right? There's nothing that compels us to do a complete overhaul, but just best practice. What direction should we be taking here?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think that a lot of our guiding values still represent the values of the city, and so I think that we could do a complete overhaul, but I don't imagine there would be substantial changes, because again, a lot of our guiding values, a lot of it's like sustainability, housing affordability, diversity, all those things. Those have been values of the city for a very long time, and they continue to be today. And those are in the master plan presently. So, that again, like, again, it is the planning commission. Staff is wanting direction from the planning commission. However, I don't think that our master plan is in rough shape by any means. I think it does reflect the values of the community. And I mean, if anybody on council feels otherwise, that is totally okay. If the not council, I mean council too. But if anybody on the commission feels that we do need to do a complete overhaul, again, that is something that staff is willing to bring forward to ensure that we get that money budgeted.
Yeah, and I guess I'm asking less about your opinion on the current master plan and more just for folks who might be plugged in with the planning industry broadly on what like recommendations and best practices are for how often that cycle to like fully renew is, because I know it was discussed as part of the last cycle. I'm just a little rusty.
So I work in regional planning is the context I work in. So I do think in the regional sense, you're spot on. If every 10 years, a full update is usually, I think, kind of the best practice, but that's at a regional scale. So I don't know, Ms. Martin, Mayor, excuse me.
I think we can do what we would call a major update to this while still retaining, like what Josh is saying, a lot of the guiding values and certainly the format, because that can get very expensive if we're like, oh, this has to look totally different. So I think there's been a lot of changes in the last 5 years, and there's going to be a lot of changes. So it would behoove us to do a major update. And to Mike's point, I mean, public engagement's going to be super duper critical, but I think like we can call it a major update while still editing the current document instead of just starting from scratch. And that's a great way to save money. I think 50,000 from MEDC is like sufficient to do an update that reflects the big changes that have happened and the input we get from the public, while still being within a reasonable budget.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that input. There isn't anything about the current master plan that feels impossible, right? That feels like a fatal flaw that would require us to like, upend it. Framework of the existing document.
Commission to give me an answer, but I mean, now if that's the
I
path
think
that
staff
we're
should ask for the most amount of money that they that they should fight for to do it. I mean, it's been over 10 years since we've updated the city master plan. The city is at an almost historic high for its population. So I don't know. Are we proud of our city or not?
I think
Proud of our city, then we should examine what our values are and make sure that the public actually supports them. We can sit in this room and say they support the public, but there's nobody from the public here. So how do we know that? I'm sorry.
He's
He's got a notebook. He's taking notes. He's a student. He's not the public.
Wow.
Just kidding. So I just think it's like, we shouldn't, I think a major update within the framework of the plan makes a lot of sense. But to see like, oh, let's only ask for $50,000.
I mean,
no,
I think the question is that we need to give staff some direction here so that they can put together the estimate of what the input is needed for a major tweak under the existing framework. If everybody agrees that a major tweak under the existing framework is the next step, then I think Josh needs to take that and figure out what that would cost, right? And that's the dollar amount that gets presented to council. If that's more than 50,000, then so be it, right? If that's what it will take. If we have a month, then we don't necessarily need to like settle on that. We can put this on the agenda for the next month. And I think our homework between now and then is if we have specific input on parts of the master plan that need like attention, need to be rewritten or overhauled, then let's do some homework there and share that with staff as guidance for what we think a major tweak looks like.
I have one thought on that right
Please.
now, and that's just the affordability. I don't even know what to call it. Like, is it a white paper? Because it was not adopted, right?
Right.
So the affordability piece feels like a major hole that like there was a lot of work put into wanting to make a plan around, and it was not able to be included. So like I would definitely like to revisit that and how to make it so it could be included. I know that there were like some challenges with what was possible in terms of what council was able to do, but I do think that revisiting that piece is going to be a chunk of that funding, figuring out how to make it work.
Roll. And I think like with that update, there are things in here. I was just flipping through because I know that I'd seen a few of them. There are things in here about visitability requirements. There are things in here about family and occupancy caps. Like there are specific actionable items that came from that, you know, the final report from the subcommittee on housing affordability and accessibility. So like that was not published as, you know, a standalone plan, and it is not published as like a chapter of this plan, but it still does show up here. That's one of those like I don't necessarily want to relitigate this, but like I had a hard time when this got adopted with us having a chapter for sustainability instead of a sustainability plan. Because like we talk about sustainability being a value, but like it being a value doesn't equate having a chapter dedicated to it when like a sustainability plan as a standalone item makes a ton of sense, right? And I feel like that is common with other municipalities. And so at the time that this was adopted, there was a lot of discussion about what gets a chapter and what doesn't get a chapter. And I don't know that where we landed makes sense, right? From a planning perspective. That's one of those structural things that if we like felt like that needed to get revisited in, you know, that is probably a more comprehensive update because we're talking about, you know, coordinating with staff and the Sustainability Commission. You know, if that were something that we wanted to revisit, working with staff and the Sustainability Commission on like separating out a standalone plan for something independent from this document. That feels like a rewrite and not an overhaul. Address your question clearly because I'm realizing I didn't. I don't think it's a problem necessarily that we don't have a chapter that says this is what the affordability bits are if our affordability goals are, you know, are an inherent part of what is discussed in the plan. Sorry to have interrupted.
No,
I
no,
don't know
I
if
was
that-
going to make a completely different point.
Okay.
Which was that there's been a lot of changes in the city in terms of like how we want to approach things like Water Street now than it was in 2013 or 2021. So yeah, I think that is homework. Figure out how much needs to change in the master plan to reflect what direction the city is going in now.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, we get some updated data, we get some updated maps, and then if there's like specific approaches to, neighborhoods or zoning districts or some of the parcels that are addressed specifically, I think that's still very much like, that feels like something that can still very much be done within the realm of a major tweak.
We've also got a zoning ordinance that would presumably be revisited after we adopt our new shiny master plan. And that has had a lot of amendments in recent years and could benefit, I think, more from an overhaul than the master plan could. So just thinking about long range planning and budgeting.
In 2013?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good for you. Do you have anything to add here to the discussion? You're the lone individual that was supporting the planning commission when this was initially adopted. Okay.
The only thing I'll say is, our last plan, total plan, what an award. So, if we want to be an award-winning city again. So.
Do we?
Is it a mouth-
Uphold our values.
Pride, diversity.
The pride one. Pride one.
Is there anything else that needs to be said about the master plan update? Okay, we'll do a lot of talking about this in the near future. So we'll limit what we have to cover tonight. That is the last item under new business. That brings us to the second public comment of the evening. A motion would be in order to open the public comment.
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Michelle, support by Phil. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Available for comment from anybody in person or online. Yeah, if you want to just step to the podium.
Where's the second one who?
Phil.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for mentioning the master plan and procedures to go ahead and revise that. I have some comments to make. The address is 1465 Washington Avenue. I am coming on behalf of my family business located on Washington on campus. We had some violations addressed. We had Mr. Burns and Mr. Myers come to the property with a site plan. Basically, to give you a quick overview because many of the planning commission here is new. There's a current court order of the site plan. But first, I'll just say two things I want to make comments about. First of all, language of the ordinances I think needs to be adjusted for the new master plan at least. So I don't know if you guys want to consider that major revisions or a whole overhaul. So currently, the master plan does not have any clear language or intent for zoning designations for sustainable use. And it's very interesting that even in new ordinances you guys are planning on incorporating into future ordinances or modifications. I'm noting that there's not a clear consideration for sustainability, be that in lighting and parking spaces. And I'm mainly here to talk about EV chargers because we have about 10% of current vehicle sales in Michigan are EV vehicles, and we only have 2 public EV chargers in Ypsilanti. I know there was a grant last year, and I'll get to that proposal with supported and endorsed by council members, state representatives, but I think that should be a #1 priority in the master plan. Ann Arbor, has a lot of ordinances, current ideas, even incentives to, undertake this mission in sustainability. So in regards or respectively in response to Josh's comment that there's, the same guiding values and that no major changes need to be made to the master plan, I think there should be. And that is especially specific and personal to me because I am seeking conditional rezoning. I will be submitting next month. And it's very unfortunate that I have to go through a conditional rezoning process because there's no specific mention of EV chargers in the master plan, except it's under 10 times and it's very general and broad. It's very hard to say this parcel that I plan on intending on using for EV charging, for example, will have light commercial use. It's really hard to kind of incorporate that into a plan that I'd be proposing, and I'd have to seek either a conditional rezoning or other options with the city. And then also I would like to say that, yes, there is a dire need for EV chargers. And there was a proposal that was endorsed by many council members, that was endorsed by a state representative. So that, you know, incorporation into that into future master plans or even ordinances, incentives, you know, like Ann Arbor does, is very unfortunate because I went to Eastern, I was an Eastern Michigan student, and now I'm at University of Michigan. It's very unfortunate that I have to charge my own car in Ann Arbor. And I don't think we need to be outsourcing many things we do here at the city, especially on a, you know, on a personal citizen level. The second thing is,
I do think that was your timer. If you could just bring your comments to a conclusion here, we'd appreciate it.
sure. The second quick thing I wanted to say is for enforcement of zoning ordinances. You know, court orders supersede any ordinances. And I have a court order on 1465 Washington Ave. The court order wants me to take off a sidewalk, and it wants me to, you know, prevent Ypsilanti from being a walkable Ypsilanti. I don't plan on pursuing that that court order, and I want to try to fix this. We have over 100 documented, you know, community members supporting this. So I would like to just bring it to the commission that there is a problem in terms of sustainability and EV charging mentions in the master plan. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Josh, do we have anybody else online for public comment?
We do not.
Okay, very good. A motion would be in order to close the public comment.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by
May I
Amanda.
say something?
After we close the
I
public
have
comment,
I
yeah.
have a conflict of interest and I want to disclose that. I represent this young man's family.
Okay,
I have a conflict of interest if I were to sit on, he's got something coming before the planning commission, which I've not dealt with.
in just a moment, because we have a motion and it's seconded. I want to do a voice vote
I'm
on the
sorry.
motion to close the public
Yeah.
comment from Amanda with a second by Mike. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. So for next month's meeting, there are recusal guidelines in our bylaws, right? So you will be able to attend the meeting, but not to vote on it. We can go over those ahead of the next meeting, but I appreciate the forewarning there. Is there anything else? I didn't want to cut off.
That's
Okay.
all.
Very
It's
good.
better to know before a commissioner gets up and walks out of the room during a hearing.
Yeah, and important in case we are close on quorum
Mhm.
numbers, so very useful. That is the end of the public comment. We will consider some of the sustainability recommendations in future master plan discussions. I appreciate the input. And obviously more to come on this parcel on Washtenaw in next month's meeting, it sounds like. With that addressed, a motion would be in order, traditionally by our newest member, to close motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion by Greg, support by Mike. All in favor, say aye.
Yeah.
Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.
I didn't catch your name because I came a couple minutes late.
I'm Greg Woodman.
Greg, all right. Mike Davis, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
It was on your agenda, my friend.
I skipped right past.
I was looking over the agenda.